Do pastels and pencils even play well together? You bet they do. Today, we'll cover everything from choosing the right coloring supplies to developing a technique that makes a beautiful coloring. First, I'll explain the difference between coloring pencils and pastels, highlighting their respective strengths and weaknesses. Then, we'll dive into the nitty-gritty of using colored pencils over pastels. You'll learn how to make your coloring pencils work in harmony with pastels, creating new colors and textures as you go. Also, watch to the end to learn how I use color theory to pick the colors for today. First, let's look at pastels versus pencils. For layering with pencils, I prefer soft pastels. A soft pastel is finely ground pigment that's been pulverized and mixed with a very small amount of binder and water. Soft pastels have more pigment than hard pastels and pastel pencils, so their color is more vibrant. And because they are soft, it is easy to apply more color onto paper. But because they are soft, with less binder, they crumble and break way more easily than hard pastels. And my absolute favorite soft pastels are pan pastels. They're a soft pastel, so what? What makes them so special? Well, the secret is in their unique presentation. These super bright pastels are packed into saucers that let you apply them like paint. And because they are in containers, they need even less binder, which means their colors are even brighter than stick pastels. Also, they make less dust than stick pastels, but there is always going to be dust when you use a soft pastel. So, pastels are loose and free pigments that flow and cover the surface areas beautifully. What about colored pencils? Not so free-flowing, but absolutely marvelous for detail work and building up colors. Color pencils often have a wood frame and a core of pigment mixed with graphite, clay, and binder. One of the most well-known brands is Prismacolor, and that's what I'll be using today. Prismacolor pencils use a high pigment content in the core to try to make their pencils more vibrant than other pencils. And they've been working on this colored pencil recipe and creating colored pencils since 1938. Two drawbacks to color pencils is you have to resharpen them, and if the cores break, then the color can be difficult to use. Before I move on, what pastels and pencils do you have? Have you ever tried blending them together? Leave a comment. I'd love to know what you all are using. Now, let's list the 5 main art supplies we'll need. Along with the 2 mediums, the pastels and pencils, we need to gather a few more supplies before we start. 1. Paper. I prefer heavier, slightly textured paper when layering many colors or mediums together. In today's sample, I'm using Neenah Vellum Bristol cardstock. 2. Next, applicators for the pastels. Pan pastel sets come with applicators, but I buy my pastels individually to cater to my color preferences. So, I buy applicators separately. And as an artist and mom on a budget, I absolutely love buying makeup applicators in bulk to use with pastels. If they're gentle enough to go on your face, they're gentle enough to go on paper. I use eyeshadow applicators and larger makeup applicators. 3. We'll also need erasers. Yep, pan pastel is erasable and we all color over the line sometimes. I often use the Tombow Mono Zero eraser for detail work and kneaded eraser for larger surface areas. 4. We'll also need fixative spray to keep those pastels in place. For that, I use Krylon Workable Fixative. And 5. For pencils, we'll need a good old-fashioned pencil sharpener. There are many pencil sharpeners, and that's a whole other conversation. For now, I say use the sharpener you prefer. Today, I'm using my old, reliable Mr. Pen metal sharpener. Definitely not the best sharpener on the market, but super affordable, durable, and it works. Alright, we have our art mediums and supplies. Next, let's look at the process. Pastels first. Okay, starting off, we will put the pastel on paper. For the larger surface areas, I use the larger makeup applicators. I sweep the colors right from the pan pastel palettes and apply the pigment straight onto the paper. Today, I'm going for a textured, smoky background, so I apply the color in dabs. Also, I am blending the different colors directly on the paper. Very impressionistic artist style. They loved blending their colors directly on the canvas. Next, I'll use my handy erasers to erase any pastel that went over the lines or wherever I want more crisp color edges. Again, you can use the Tombow Mono Zero Eraser for smaller detail work, or just use a kneaded eraser and mold it to whatever shape you want. I use the eyeshadow applicators on smaller areas, still blending the colors on the paper, but now I use a smooth, flowing gesture instead of the dabs that I used in the background. The pastels are used sparingly in some areas. I don't want to completely coat the paper in pastels. Instead, wherever the image is lighter, I let the white of the paper show through. This helps start the sense of volume that will build up a lot more with color pencils. In the fox's fur, I block out the shadows in soft lines or wisps of color. This helps maintain the sense of lighting and keeps that lovely fur texture. And also, I'll list the exact colors I'm using in the video description for you. You don't have to guess. Next is Fixative. When the weather is nice, I take my art outside to spray Fixative. It's a bit smelly and best to not breathe in those fumes. Today I use Krylon Workable Fixative. Spray gently over the image and let it dry for at least 30 minutes. This is a great fixative that prevents the pastel from smudging and leaves a slight texture on the paper, so I can apply color pencils on top. I have a whole video on how to apply fixative spray. I'll put a link to that in the video description for you. After the fixative is dry, the pastel colors look a bit deeper or darker. Fixative takes away the shine of colors, showing their true hue. If you aren't sure what your pastels will look like after spraying, you may want to test them on scrap paper first. Also, if you aren't sure what your pencils will look like over the pastels, be sure to test them over scrap paper beforehand also. When choosing your color palette for each item on the page, try to remember that coloring Grayscale is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Choose one dark color, one medium dark color, and one light color to start. For example, in the fox fur, I chose dark, medium, and light brown pencils. Then, I expanded the color palette to include other colors that played nicely with those browns. Also, as I mentioned, color pencils are fantastic for detail work and building up color. We already blended pastels together on the paper. Now we're building up color even more, creating complex hues to make the image way more interesting. First, on the fox in the middle, you can see I used the pencils in small strokes or dashes. This helps maintain that sense of fur texture. I start with the shadows, blocking out the darker areas so I have a sense of lighting, and immediately build up the volume in the image. The browns and oranges and the color pencils are blending wonderfully with the brown and yellow pastel below. The pastel colors were the starting point. Now I'm using the pencils to expand the warm color palette in the fur. To really make the white highlights of the fur pop off the page visually, I used a white paint marker, but it's not necessary. Next, I layer the warm red and browns in the acorns and pine cones and berries. Instead of applying the color in strokes or dashes, like I did with the fox fur to keep the texture, I apply the pencil in small circles to create a nice, smooth look. Remember, all these colors are blending together. The pencil colors are blending with the pastel colors. Make sure you test the colors together to make sure they blend nicely. This might be a good time to talk about color theory. I based this on a tetradic color scheme. Ooh, we're getting fancy now. A tetradic color scheme is two sets of complementary colors. So we have blues and orange, the background and the oranges in the fur and acorns, and we have red and green in the berries and leaves. So that background is a cool blue. I really wanted warm orange colors to provide a nice contrast to that background. So the warm bright oranges in the fox's fur, and in case you're wondering, brown is orange with a touch of black in it. The rich red in the berries and acorns, it all provides a lovely contrast to the greens in the leaves. But there's more. The tetradic color scheme was just the starting point. The grains in the leaves are acting more like a bridge, connecting the warm and cool tones. I made sure they had lots of yellow in them so they have warm elements, but those blues in the leaf shadows connect them visually to the cool background blues. Whew, okay, I really worked that tetratic color scheme. If you would like to master colors, go download my workshop, Master the 7 Fundamental Color Schemes. I'll put the link in the video description for you. Marvelous! So this was a quick review of how to color pencils over pastels, and I know some of you are saying you want to go next level, especially with developing your coloring technique. Well, there's a playlist for that. Go check out my playlist on YouTube about how to color like a pro. And as always, stay creative!